Okay, nicely done.
Bugs Bunny.
We're going to take a break, after which we're looking at ME. We're asking if it still has a stigma, because when patients were first diagnosed in the 70s, they were branded lazy, work-shy, hypochondriacs, and I want to know if attitudes have finally changed. Judging from what I've been reading on Twitter, I suspect the answer may be no. 0207 173 5555, the number if you care to let me know some more. We'll talk some more on the Switch Under 4.
When did the World Health Organization recognise ME as a neurological disorder? In 1969, 1979 or 1989? Find out after this short break. So before the break, we asked when did the World Health Organization recognise ME as a neurological disorder? And the answer is 1969.
Welcome back to Monday Show with that startled Adam Rickett there. You thought it was much later.
That amazes me. Yeah. That does stagger me. It was that long ago.
Amanda Lamb's here too, and Erwin Sparks from the Whoosies. At 11 this morning, we're going to be talking to Channel 5's history woman, Dr. Susanna Lipscomb, and also finding out if TV is guilty of sexing up factual programming, constantly playing up how dangerous, violent, bloody, scary, sexy real life can be. 0207 173 5555. That's the number. Your thoughts on that? Right now we're looking at ME, something a lot of you have wanted us to do for some time, and we're asking if it still carries a stigma. Today is International ME Awareness Day, so it's a good time to assess how far or not our understanding of chronic fatigue syndrome has come since, as we heard, sufferers were first diagnosed in the late 60s, early 70s. ME, or Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, affects 250,000 Brits, and aside from severe fatigue, they may be also struggling with things like painful joints, gastric problems, poor memory, lapses in concentration. And as you probably know, no one's entirely sure what causes it. In some cases, it can be triggered by a virus like glandular fever. In others, it may be genetically inherited. And it's far more likely, statistically at least, to affect women than men. 70% of sufferers are female, although those stats could be skewed by the fact that women are much more likely to seek medical help than men. And what's more, there is no cure. Medication, exercise, talking therapy, they're all recommended by the NHS. But as I said, I'm looking at the stigma, really, of a syndrome that was once dubbed yuppie flu, as people mistakenly linked ME with high achievers burning out. And as a result, many sufferers got abuse, not sympathy. They were dubbed work-shy, malingerers and lazy. And this in spite of the World Health Organization recognising ME, as we just heard, as early as 1969. It's still getting through to the medical fraternity, because many doctors told sufferers it was just all in the mind. And it strikes me that things must have changed more recently, if only because the likes of former Chief Medical Officer Liam Donaldson argued, I think back in 2002, that it was a genuine illness, and 2 years later the Department of Health officially recognised it as a chronic condition on a par with multiple sclerosis and asthma. And yet, and I do find this quite alarming, a study just 3 years back found that 84% of neurologists don't recognise ME as a neurological illness. They may perceive it as some other form of illness, but not neurological. Last week, 16-year-old Holly Buckley, who struggled with ME for the last 3 years, told her the ongoing stigma she faces from medics who simply don't believe her, who can be threatening and unkind, as well as teachers who showed no sympathy. And I know a couple of you on the panel know people with ME. You do, don't you, Owen?
Yeah, I have a very close friend who's got that, yeah.
So what's their experience been like?
Yeah, it's been... what they've found is that because there's no clear diagnosis in terms of any sort of treatment or prescriptive course, because it has to be tailored to the individual, there's just years of where it's quite a grey, unresolved issue of finding anything that works for them, and then attempting to work that alongside having a family and a career. They've found that there's been far more breakthroughs actually in America, where certain pockets of the health industry have really taken it seriously, whereas it just doesn't seem, even by GPs, even as that young girl's letter showed about her treatment at the hands of GPs.
We asked her, I mean, Holly's a big fan of the show, and we really wanted to get her this morning. She's actually too ill to travel to the studio. Right. Very debilitating. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a friend whose young daughter was put in hospital for 6 months and put on antidepressants, because basically his doctor didn't accept that ME existed. She was 7 or 8 years old, and she was put on antidepressants. And, you know, it's And it was only actually when she went to go and see her, when the dad took her along to see, homeopathy, that actually they started seeing that there was an issue there, an underlying issue. And I think it seems to me, and I'm sure we'll hear better from your guest, but it seems to me it's very much luck of the draw whether you get a GP or a specialist who is open to the concept. And and I've met other people who've suffered from ME. If you meet them, it's not, it's a genuine illness. Whatever has triggered it, whether it was a virus or whether it was, something else, it's a genuine illness, and it goes on to have so many different side effects like IBS and everything like that. So I think people just need to not even argue the question anymore. It's an illness, and they need to accept it just because you don't understand it.
Okay. Well, let's meet. We've got a couple of interesting characters with us this morning. We've got Sonia Chowdhury, who's Chief Executive of the charity Action for ME, and also Paul Davey, who's been living with ME for an astonishing 25 years. So we'll start with you, if we may, Paul. We're looking at the stigma issue. What was it like when you were first, how difficult was it to be diagnosed 25 years ago?
Sure. My first experience, my GP said to my parents, I sort of then later found out, was she said, we won't mention ME. I think that really reflected, at the time, obviously, she was thinking this might be the diagnosis, this might be the condition, but didn't want to say that, didn't want me to hear that, I think.
And 25 years on, can you summarise as best you can what life with ME for 25 years is like?
It's about managing it carefully, like any long-term health condition. Living with it is about managing it, and it's about how you prioritise your time, your energy, different aspects of your life. It has an impact on all areas of my life. I've been very fortunate in that I've got a very supportive partner and family.
Do the effects of ME go up and down, or are you on a slow trajectory up back to health? How does it manifest itself?
As you say, kind of up and down.
So do you think you're going to have it for life, till the day you die?
Perhaps. I don't know. I don't presume so. I think that we all have to manage our health and well-being.
Yeah.
And we all have to manage different symptoms and fight off infections and deal with stresses and things like that. Perhaps for myself it takes me a bit longer to recover from, say, an infection, stresses to the system like that. But yes, that's something that I've learned how to manage, and that I expect to continue to need to do so very carefully.
Okay, and Sonia, in terms of stigma, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I know somebody who had ME, and they've actually recovered, but at one point they were so seriously ill I couldn't believe that people would treat it in such a dismissive way. But at the same time, I myself felt a degree of frustration. And he said, come on, get better. That's all you could do. But I did have a genuine frustration. I think that perhaps explains why we used to, or maybe still have a stigma.
Yeah, absolutely. I have yet to meet a person with ME who doesn't want to get better.
Right.
We know that there's about 25% of people who are so severely ill they're not able to be here, like you mentioned, Holly, earlier on, and can be ill for many, many years, many decades.
And very severely ill.
Very, very severely
really
ill.
Sick.
To the point that some people have to be fed, they're not able to get up out of bed, even to sit up in bed. It can be very, very disabling, and that's often hidden. I describe ME as an illness of mystery. You mentioned earlier on that there's still a lot that we don't know. We desperately need medical research and funding for that so we can start to learn more. But actually, where you have mystery, you have myths. And you talked about some of the myths earlier on. As I said, there are so many people that want to get better, that want to be able to re-engage with activities that they used to be able to, but are faced with stigma.
Do you think the stigma is as persistent and irritating today as it would have been, say, in the late 80s?
Certainly Action for ME hear quite a lot from people who have a lot of stigma. We have a report that's just released today that identified that less than 30% of people that responded had felt that their GP was well informed. Less than 30% felt their GP was well informed. And GPs themselves are saying, we are struggling, we just do not know what to do. And yet there is a lot that can be done to provide support and provide care. And also in Action for ME's report today, we identified that the majority of people said that the one thing that would make a difference was a better informed GP. So there is more that we can do.
Okay. We'll hold that thought as we take a break, and after which we're going to hear from you. As I said, we're trying to find out if ME still carries a stigma. Is it perhaps understandable that some cynics may think sufferers lazy rather than sick? 0271 173 5555, the number. Do feel free, by the way, to fire a question to Sonia or Paul. Your calls are nothing but coming up next.
According to a 2010 study, what percentage of ME sufferers say doctors told them it was purely psychological? 8, 18 or 28%? Find out after the ads. So according to a 2010 study, what percentage of ME sufferers say doctors told them it was purely psychological? The answer is 28%.
Yes, all in the mind, apparently. Welcome back to Monday's show with Adam Rickett, Amanda Lamb, Owen Sparks. Coming up next, we're going to be talking to Channel 5's Dr. Susanna Lipscomb, talking about her latest series and finding out who thinks TV is guilty of sexing up factual programming, constantly playing out how dangerous, sexy or violent life can be. 0271 173 5555 is the number, whatever you're feeling. Right now it's over to you as we try to find out if Britain's 250,000 ME sufferers are still stigmatised by cynics who think of them as lazy hypochondriacs. Myalgic encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome, has a variety of triggers and no known cure, but sufferers, as indeed one of us guests this morning has alluded to, can endure decades of debilitating symptoms ranging from exhaustion to countless aches and pains. But while senior medics urge doctors to treat what we used to call yuppie flu more seriously, negative, cynical attitudes still clearly persist. So let's cut straight to the phones. What are people saying?
We have Catherine first on line 1.
Morning, Catherine.
Morning, Matthew. Hello, everyone.
Are you a sufferer yourself?
I had very severe ME back in the late 90s, early noughties, but I've got some real quality of life back now.
How did people treat you during that time?
Horrendous. I was actually told by one consultant it was a shame I didn't actually have MS because they could do something for me then. It was really awful. I mean, there was very little compassion, very little understanding. But after a couple of years, I actually did manage to get into a specialist unit down in Essex. It's Professor Finley's unit, which was a wonderful, wonderful unit which really put me on the path to recovery. But that's now sadly closed, and it seems a lot of the specialist units have been being closed. So for patients now who are severely affected, there's very little help out there.
Sorry, Sonia Chowdhury from Action for ME. I mean, is that true that these specialist units are closing?
Yes, we hear regularly actually of services that are losing funding. There are a few that are getting an increase in funding, but we know that there are not enough specialist services to meet the need. And if you happen to live in Scotland, there's very, very little there for you. People have to travel.
What do you get in a specialist unit? What do you get that you don't get elsewhere?
That varies depending on who's involved and who's leading the service, but you get people that understand the illness. That would be what you would hope, and you would get specific treatments and ability to help you with specific symptoms. And as we've heard earlier on, if GPs are unable to diagnose or to help, that actually having somebody that's able to talk to you about the illness, how to manage your illness, and how to have hope for the future, then that can only be a good thing.
Okay.
Do you think it falls into the same category, I use the word quite loosely, as mental illness? My brother has bipolar disorder, and I know he has the same type of, that kind of pull yourself together. It's the silent illness. You can't physically see it, so people don't understand it. And he's had his, all the government funding has been cut in Richmond, so the place that he used to go to have the cognitive behavioural therapy, gone. Adios. And I wonder whether, because we can't physically see it, you're not in a wheelchair, you haven't lost your hair through chemo, we don't understand it. Maybe. So there is that case of, just pull yourself together, get out of bed, come on,
And the frustrating thing for me is a physical illness. And it goes on to have so many effects. I said it leads on to IBS. Like if you want to go abroad, you're petrified of having your jabs because you're scared.
I just want to know why more women seem to suffer from it than men. Is it a genetic thing? Is it?
We
lifestyle?
don't know.
Don't know.
We just don't know, and that's where there's a desperate need for more research, because we do need to understand this illness better, so we know better, know how to support people better.
It's very hard,
but
isn't it?
it's not a mental illness.
No.
But like with all illnesses, there is a psychological and emotional impact
But there's
as
a
a
stigma
result.
attached to both, isn't there? Because you can't physically see it. There's not a limb hanging off, or that you can't physically see it, so therefore you don't understand it. And I think our brains are quite simple in that respect. If we can't physically see what's wrong with you, then why on earth can't you get out of bed?
There's not one course of prescribed treatment.
No.
either.
It's like some people respond very well to diet and diet change.
How did
but that
Catherine
doesn't-
respond?
Well, let's find out. Catherine, good morning. How have things worked for you then medically? What is this?
Medically, one of your panellists was just saying that there's no physical signs. If you're one of the 25%, as I was very severely affected, I went from 11 stone to 6.5 stone. I was 5'10". I was just a breathing corpse lying in a darkened room because my light sensitivity was so severe. I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I couldn't feed myself. Bedpans were just the normal of every day. I was one step away from a catheter. When I was taken into the specialist unit, there was a team there of counsellors, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, neurologists, who really kind of looked at me and went, right, well, the first stage is you sleep 3 hours a day. That's all I slept. The rest of the time I was just lying in pain in the bed. So they corrected my sleep problems. From that point on, I was getting some sleep, because it's a fallacy that all ME patients sleep 20 hours a day. We don't. We're wired but tired. Our brains can't switch off.
Okay.
So they corrected my sleep problems, and from that point on, I started to actually get some energy that my body could start to self-correct.
So you paint a very good picture, and I'm getting a better understanding now as to how sort of specialist treatment can work. There is no cure, but we can alleviate one symptom, and in turn that will have a positive impact perhaps on other symptoms and so on. Catherine, I wish you all the best with your journey. Appreciate the call. Let's have another.
We have Katie on line 3.
Morning, Katie.
Morning.
Are you a sufferer yourself?
I don't have ME. I have a very similar condition called fibromyalgia, which causes fatigue and also up to pain.
Okay, and we're talking.
I phoned in because it has a very similar stigma and taboo because it's not visible.
Right, and it's the stigma that I'm most interested in hearing about. I mean, have you experienced any kind of sort of negative reactions from medics or just ordinary people?
Well, there's a lot of health professionals who basically do not believe that these type of illnesses are real, and then also people like acquaintances. I'll not say friends because friends understand, but people who see maybe me out one day and they say, see me with my children, and they don't see that the next day, because I've had to go out, the next day I'm physically incapable of walking because I've pushed myself the previous day.
Can you appreciate, now devil's advocate again, I mean, can you appreciate that for some people there's a degree of frustration that, I take Amanda's point, they may not be able to see any symptoms, it's an intangible illness, and that on some days sufferers appear to be better than others, and there's a sense of, come on, pull yourself together, and maybe that's what ill-informs the general public, is just there's a sense of frustration about it.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I've had that from somebody. Well, put yourself together, as you find a set of curtains. But, I mean, I think for sufferers it's frustrating as well, because we have things that are good, we have things that are bad, and then we have the fact that some of these illnesses don't have cure. And then you go to a health professional because you're desperate, you want some help, and then the health professional either doesn't know how to find you help, or doesn't believe that this is a condition, and then says, well, go away and deal with it.
That's why I don't understand the stigma, because if you have any other illness, you go to your doctor, this one person you go to for salvation, and they save you. and
Well,
nobody
that's
gives
the
them
hope.
stigma.
That's the
But when you
hope.
have ME, you go to your doctor, and everyone's like, sorry, I don't know how to help you. And we stigmatise those people.
Well, you can say that. You can look at alcoholism, drug addiction.
Mental health gets it
people throw
horrifically as well,
themselves. You know, they're supposed to get treatment, but.
But then you look at something like, say, shell shock. Back in the First World War, we used to put people to death because we thought they were cowards, and it's only after actually exploring we realised it was a condition.
Yeah.
You know, so I think for Joe Public to, stigmatise people because they don't understand it, they shouldn't. They should be, there by the grace of God. Yeah.
Katie, thank you very much. Good luck to you. Let's try another.
We have Bianca on line 4.
Morning, Bianca.
Good morning.
You're a sufferer.
I certainly am.
How long have you struggled with it?
A few years, and it's gradually getting worse for me.
Okay, and the response from medics?
Not great. I've had every blood test that you can possibly imagine, over and over and over again, cancers, leukemias, all sorts, which terrify you as you're going through it, dreading the worst, and then finally, at the end of it all, when everything else has come back clear, they sort of look at you and sigh and say, well, it must just be CFS then.
Okay. From friends and family, what kind of response do you get from them as time goes on? Because it is a chronic syndrome.
Close friends are really understanding. They know that, when I say I've got to go to bed for an hour, they can't sort of talk me round. I've just got to go and sleep, and sometimes I can almost be mid-conversation and my eyes will shut and I'll just say sorry, and I'll wake up an hour later with a blanket, and they understand. But most of the time, if you do manage to get out and you're all cheerful and happy, people say, oh, you wouldn't know you had ME, and I'm thinking, yeah, you wouldn't right now, but
forgive me for jumping in, Bianca. I can see Paul nodding along there, so that obviously means something to you.
Absolutely, I hear that, absolutely. Oh, Paul, not you, surely not. You've got lots of energy. That's because I present myself in that way when I'm working or whatever I might be doing, and they don't see the me that's collapsed or that's struggling with the rest of my life.
The blanket with hot bean bags on your knees.
Yeah.
Okay, and something Bianca said that's made me think. In terms of diagnosis, doctors can only do what science will enable them to do in terms of testing. Do you think that doctors perhaps come to an ME diagnosis because they've run out of anything else that they can empirically prove and test for, whereas perhaps they need to rephrase it and start coming out that this patient demonstrates symptoms of ME? Is there a problem with how it's diagnosed?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that there is an issue with misdiagnosis and a lack of diagnosis, but actually GPs can make a positive diagnosis of ME. It's not a case of I've run out of all options, so I'll just call it ME. Doctors should be making a positive diagnosis. They should.
But it's very difficult, isn't it? You have a patient that presents symptoms of ME, but you have no empirical test to prove it.
There are tests that doctors can do. They can rule out other things, as we heard from the caller just now. And there is information available for doctors that they should be able to refer to if they're struggling and not knowing where else to go with a diagnosis.
Okay. I'm going to have to wrap it up there. I mean, we could, quite frankly, do this all day and probably most of the rest of the week with the number of calls there. I promise you we will revisit it again in the future. But for now, I'd like to say thank you to Sonia and Paul for joining us this morning. And I'd also like to recommend anybody with any issues or concerns may check out the website action4me.org.uk. A good place to go if you want to find out more. And it's also a sad goodbye to our Owen here as well. Lovely to see you this Monday morning. And best luck with the new Who's Years album. Here it is, The News from Nowhere. And the tour which kicks off tonight in Bristol. Fleece and Firkin, Firkin and Fleece.
Firkin, just Firkin.
Just Firkin, Lee said. Firkin down in Bristol. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. After the break, Dr. Susanna Lipscomb's going to join us.